Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Hiren Patel in Division of Bioequivalence II in OB within OGD. First of all, I would like to thank SBIA organizing committee for having me and Dr. Stoddard for the nice introduction. As we heard multiple presentations on a pre-ANDA space as well as the control correspondence, in today's talk, I will be talking about the post-complete response letter scientific meeting request under GDUFA III, and I will share some of the case studies. With that, before going into my presentation, I have the following disclaimer. This presentation reflects my views and should not be construed to represent FDA's views or policy. Let's begin with the learning objective. The learning objective for my today's talks are to provide a brief overview of post-complete response letter scientific meeting request under GDUFA III. In my talk, I will use the abbreviated form CRL for the complete response letter and MRs for the meeting request. I'll walk you through some of the historical information and case studies using this avenue, and I will conclude my presentation with take-home message and do's and don'ts to effectively use this avenue. I'll start with the background, and the purpose of a post-CRL scientific MR is to provide a scientific advice to the applicant on possible approaches to address deficiency communicated in a CRL to establish bioequivalence. So the question may arise that which applications are qualified to utilize this platform, and I will break it down in two ways. The current thinking is if the drug product is complex and meet one of the criteria listed in the GDUFA III commitment letter, then it is most likely that the MR is granted. Those four criteria include a new equivalence study needed to address the deficiency communicated in a CRL, or an approach that is different from that submitted in ANDA, or a new comparative use human factor study, or a new approach to demonstrate sameness of complex active pharmaceutical ingredient or API. Alternatively, if the agency determined that the question asked in the meeting request raises the issue that are best addressed via this meeting process, and it will be beneficial to both applicant and the agency in terms of utilization of the resources, it falls under a category which I would call it a may grant situation, and certain meeting requests can be or may be granted with FDA's discretion. So as I mentioned, some of the criteria listed in the commitment letter, if it does not meet those criteria, then the meeting request is most likely denied. In addition, if the question asked in the meeting request is more appropriate and effective to be addressed via the control correspondence pathway, there are more chances that the meeting request can be denied. Incomplete meeting package could be another possible reason for the denial of the meeting request. I understand this is very broad term, so what is called a complete meeting package? Ideally, the complete meeting package include but not limited to the list of questions and their relevant criteria listed in the GDUFA III commitment letter. It is extremely helpful to provide a supporting rationale or data as applicable for that drug product. In addition, it is helpful to provide supporting information about the drug product, for example, complex or non-complex. As Dr. Murphy mentioned in the morning presentation, it is extremely helpful that the cover letter should clearly identify that this request is related to the post-CRL scientific MR. So I hope this provides a brief overview about a complete meeting package, and it should vary based on application to application. With that, I would like to provide some additional remark. As mentioned in the general guidance for industry, it is not a prerequisite to have a prior product development meeting for a respective ANDA to be eligible to request a post-CRL scientific meeting. In addition, prior post-CRL clarification teleconference to seek only clarification concerning deficiency identified in a CRL would not impact the eligibility to submit a post-CRL scientific meeting. If there are additional questions after post-CRL scientific meeting, there are two possible avenues. The applicant may submit a control correspondence, or if it meets the criteria, they can also submit another post-CRL scientific meeting to seek the additional feedback. I would like to emphasize that the same questions should not be asked at multiple avenues, which you also heard in the previous presentation. With that, I would like to provide a brief overview on the general timeline. This timeline applies to the ANDAs in a complete response status that meet the eligibility requirement for post-CRL scientific MR. On the day agency received the post-CRL scientific MR is considered as day 0. Within 14 days of the receipt of MR, the agency will issue the decision to grant or deny the meeting request. In the case of denial, denial letter with justification should be issued to the applicant. If it is granted, the grant letter will include a goal date for the written response or a meeting date, preliminary FDA attendee, and format of meeting to the applicant. If the meeting is granted as a written response within 90 days after the meeting request is granted, the agency will communicate the written response to the applicant. However, if the MR is granted as meeting, then within 85 days after the meeting request is granted or around 5 days prior to the meeting, agency intends to issue a preliminary response to the applicant in preparation of the meeting. If the preliminary response is satisfactory to the applicant and there are no any additional discussion items, then applicant may submit a request to cancel the meeting. Alternatively, there will be a face-to-face or video conference. As you heard in the previous presentation, GDUFA III commitment letter do indicate about the teleconference option. However, due to the nature of this meeting, agency encouraged to utilize the face-to-face and video conference to have a productive discussion on a scientific issue. It is also encouraged to submit updated agenda, list of follow-up or clarification question, and any proposed presentation material no later than 48 hours prior to the meeting. Once the meeting is held within 30 days, the agency will issue a final official meeting minutes to the applicant. If a due date falls on a weekend or a federal holiday, it will be moved to the preceding business day. So far, I have talked about the information from the GDUFA III commitment letter and the information in the general guidance. Now, I will provide the information on the historical data using this avenue. As you may aware that the agency recently introduced a new platform that is post-CRL scientific MR starting from October 2022. Within the first 16 months, the agency received a total of 25 post-CRL scientific MR. Out of those, 20 MRs were for the complex products, while 5 meeting requests for the non-complex product. A total of 17 MRs were granted, while 8 were denied. As we can see in the chart, 18 applicants utilized this platform, and the blue color indicates the number of granted meetings, while orange color indicates the number of denied meetings for each of them. This slide further provides the breakdown of number of post-CRL scientific MR by route of administration and dosage form. The inner circle represents the route of administration, which include topical, oral, injection, inhalation, subcutaneous, transdermal, and nasal. And the outer circle represents the dosage form for each of the route of administration, along with the number of post-CRL scientific MR received for each of them. The take-home message from this slide that this platform has been widely used for a range of dosage form with different route of administration for generic drug product. Now let's take a closer look on the incoming application. Out of 17 MR requests, 16 were for the complex product and 1 meeting was for the non-complex product. As I mentioned earlier, some of the meeting requests were granted as it was for the complex product and met one of the criteria listed in the commitment letter. In this regard, I have a further breakdown on number of post-CRL received for each of those criteria, which include criteria A, B, and D. However, in certain situations, the meeting request was granted with FDA's discretion. In this regard, the meeting request asks a question related to alternative approach or having a multiple question and complex issue which require intra and inter-office collaboration. There was an instance where there was a non-complex product. However, it met one of the criteria listed in the GDUFA III commitment letter. So this is about the granted MRs, and I'm going to talk about the denied meeting now. Out of the 8 denied meetings, 5 MRs were for the complex products and 3 were for the non-complex product. The most common reason for the denial of the meeting request where the question asked in the meeting request were outside the scope and they were more appropriate or suitable for the control correspondence pathway. There was an instance where the same question were asked at the multiple avenue and which resulted in a denial of the meeting. Now let's look at the distribution of the data of the incoming granted meeting request. Majority of the time, the meeting requests were granted as requested. However, with FDA's discretion, it is determined on a case-by-case basis. In this regard, around 35% of the meeting requests were granted as a written response, while remaining around 65% of the meeting were granted as meeting. The further breakdown of those 65% meeting include 35% meeting requests were as video conference, 18% as face-to-face meeting, and 12% as teleconference. As you can see, the face-to-face meeting is only 18% because the agency resumed the face-to-face meeting in last October, that is October 2023, and this corresponds to only the 4-month data. We anticipate that this number will subject to change as we move forward with more face-to-face meeting. I would move to the lead office of granted meeting request. Before talking about the data, I would like to briefly talk about what do I mean by the lead office. Lead office is the one who chaired the post-CRL scientific meeting when granted. However, due to the nature of this meeting, it is generally required collaboration across and within the offices, and multiple offices are involved to address the question asked in the meeting request. In this regard, around 76% of the meeting requests were led by Office of Bioequivalence, while OPQ led 18% of the granted meeting and OSC 6%. In today's presentation, I will use some of the case studies in which Office of Bioequivalence was the lead discipline, and I will categorize for each of those examples. The first category is the drug product is for the complex product, and it meets the first criteria listed in the GDUFA III commitment letter, that is a new equivalence study was needed, and the example is for the metered aerosol inhalation product. In the CRL, the agency communicated about the inadequacy about realistic aerodynamic particle size distribution and computational fluid dynamics modeling study. In the MR, the applicant proposed a detailed study design to address the deficiency communicated in CRL. The next example in this category is for the intravenous injectable product. In the CRL, the applicant was recommended to conduct a new pivotal in vitro particle size distribution study using adequate exhibit batches. In the MR, the applicant sought the feedback on the proposal of manufacturing 3 batches of test product at commercial scale and utilize a modified approach to support bioequivalence following the recommendation in the PSG. The next category is for the complex product, and it meets the second criterion in the GDUFA III commitment letter, that is a different approach from submission in ANDAs. And the example is for the topical aerosol foam product. In the CR, the applicant was recommended to conduct in vivo BE study with clinical endpoint following the recommendation in the PSG. In the MR, the applicant proposed to pursue in vitro characterization-based BE approach. The next example in this category is for the topical lotion. The applicant was recommended to conduct one of the in vitro BE study, that is in vitro permeation test or IVPT, under characterization-based BE approach. In the MR, the applicant proposed a different approach, that is physiological-based pharmacokinetic or PBPK modeling to support the bioequivalence. The next category is a complex product, and it met the two criteria listed in the GDUFA III commitment letter, that is, a new equivalence study was needed and a different approach from the submission in ANDA. And the example, this is a very interesting example of meter aerosol inhalation product. There were two different ANDAs for two different strengths for the same drug product by the same applicant. As the applicant utilized the similar study design, as well as the data are very similar, within the scope of the bioequivalence assessment, similar issues were noted, which resulted in a similar deficiency communication to the applicant for both the application. In the MR, the applicant sought clarification and concurrence for a series of repeated or a new equivalence study to address communicated deficiency in a CRL for respective ANDAs. To ensure the efficiency, a 2-hour combined meeting was granted to discuss both the application. The next category is for the complex product with alternative approach, and the example is for the intravenous injectable product. In the MR, the applicant proposed an alternative approach for statistical evaluation of PKB study to address the deficiency in the CRL. The next example is for non-complex product with alternative approach, and the example is for the extended release oral tablet. In the MR, the applicant proposed an alternative approach, that is utilization of population pharmacokinetic or POP-PK approach to address the deficiency comment related to T-lag that was observed in the previously submitted data. The last category is for the non-complex product with the complex issue, and it is for the immediate release oral tablets. In the MR, the applicant sought the agency's input for utilization of alternative study design compared to the recommendation in the general guidance of industry for BCS-based biowaiver and relevant challenges. Specifically, there were issues with the data due to the complexity and instability of API in the acidic media. I hope this provides a brief overview about the granted MRs. I would talk about some of the common observations for the denial of MRs. There were non-complex products, and the question asked in the meeting request were outside the scope of post-CRL scientific MR, and they were more suitable for the control correspondence pathway. There was an instance where more than one meeting request was requested to discuss particular or the same question at multiple avenues. In addition to that, requests to reevaluate or reconsider the data along with dispute regarding the relevance of deficiency are some of the common observations for the denial of MR. With that, I would like to talk about the take-home message from this presentation. I would start with the purpose. The purpose of the post-CRL scientific MR is to provide a scientific advice on possible approaches to address communicated deficiency in a CRL related to establishing equivalence. FDA will not pre-review any specific scientific data submitted in the meeting package within the scope of post-CRL scientific MR. However, it is encouraged to provide supporting data for the proposed approach as applicable. In general, the acceptability of any new approach along with study data is assessed upon submission of an ANDA amendment with relevant data and information. In my concluding remark, I would like to make a note that this is a great recently introduced platform to have a scientific discussion between the agency and the applicant to come on a consensus on a scientific issue to work towards the same goal, that is availability of a high quality generic drug product in a market in a timely manner. And we have received a tremendous positive feedback for this platform from the applicant who utilized this avenue. With that, it is time for the challenge question. If an applicant has an additional question after a post-CRL scientific meeting, the applicant may request a subsequent post-CRL scientific meeting or submit a control correspondence. Is it true or false? If you pick true, you are correct. The next challenge question is, since the applicant did not have product development meeting, the application is not qualified for post-CRL scientific MR, despite it is a complex product and meet one of the 4 criteria outlined in the GDUFA III commitment letter. That is correct. With that, I have some resources to refer, and I would like to thank Drs. Nair, Vivian, Chiang, Zhang, Pai, and Roy. And I would like to thank all bioequivalence assessors for their efforts. Last but not the least, I would like to thank all of you to patiently listen my presentation.